I'm sure some of it is mental because we're having mental breakdowns during the last 5 minutes, but we're continuing to work on it. We'll continue to work on it, watch film on it, execute in practice, but that's the area that we know we have to grow.
Pels blow a 17-point lead on the road in Boston. It was a close game down to the end and just couldn't finish in those final 5 minutes. Jake Madison, Locked on Pelicans. He's on Twitter at NolaJake. Y'all give him a follow. I mean, God does a daily Pelicans podcast. It's freaking awesome content. We appreciate it as always, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. Let me start, Jake, with a big picture, easy question that may not have an easy answer, or maybe it does. Why has this team struggled against the best teams in the East and the West? I mean, obviously, they're good teams, but there's a pretty clear mark of delineation, right, when they play the elite teams and everybody else.
Yeah, I think when you look at this Pelicans team, right, like they're a talented team that's capable of winning games, getting the one-off game against top-level competition, but there's something holding them, right? That's very clear at this point in the season. We're over halfway there. They've blown multiple second-half double-digit leads. Something's going on here, and I think it's a bit of a complex answer. I think you can look at three levels with this, right? You can start with the players. You know, in this loss against the Boston Celtics, they turned the ball over a bunch in the final 5 minutes of the game that led to easy buckets for the Boston Celtics. You know, that turns into 0 points for you, 2 to 3 to 4 points for your opponent. That's a very good way to blow a lead very quickly, right? And when you look at the Boston Celtics, down the stretch, they were executing really well compared to the Pelicans, who were playing just sloppy basketball and seemed a little bit lost during that time. And so when you kind of look at these two teams, it comes down to kind of execution. I think with Boston, it's really they've been together. This is a team that's won together a bunch, right? They're leading the league so far this season. They've only lost 2 home games. They've been to an NBA Finals. There's experience there. And while there's experience on the Pelicans side of things, this is really the first full season we're getting of Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and CJ McCollum, and they're still kind of figuring some things out. While there's a lot of talent out there on the court, it's just not exactly gelling together in these final 5 minutes of games, and that's, I think, been a problem for them. Maybe that comes with time. Maybe that doesn't, though, and you're starting to run out of time for them to kind of figure some of this stuff out. I think another side of it is coaching. You know, I think you can point the finger at head coach Willie Green and say the rotations and some of the lineup combinations he's been putting out there really don't work in the second half. They've been experimenting, starting with Larry Nance Jr. in place of Jonas Valanciunas in the second half, and they're losing third quarters regularly. So clearly that's not working, but it's something that they seem intent on sticking with for the foreseeable future. You know, when you have a 15 to 20-point lead, you might think it's safe to run a defensive lineup out there. So you'll see them put in Dyson Daniels, you know, Najee Marshall, Herb Jones, but then you stop scoring points. And if that was working, these defensive lineups, you wouldn't be blowing second-half leads like you've been doing, right? If this was something that was actually accomplishing what they want, we wouldn't be having this conversation on the radio right now. And then I think the third level is looking at the front office here. You know, do these players actually fit well together enough to kind of be a cohesive unit and win long term? And I think that's a bit of an open question right now. So you could point to any of those things and say that's why they're losing some of these games, and all three of them together definitely mean you're going to lose games.
I'm going to come back to those in part each one by one, but let me stick with last night. So look, Boston's been really good at home, right? I mean, they won their first, 20 games at home this year. How much of last night was just they're really freaking good, man. And they've been really freaking good at home.
Look, it's a little column A, little column B here, right? You know, I think when you look at this, you know, you can take the glass half full approach. And this is what I did to open my show in today's episode, right? They were up 17 on Boston, in Boston, a place where they only have 2 losses, and they're really good and the title favorite, and you took it to that team, and especially in the first half, you executed well. The offense looked cohesive. They were playing off one another well. You weren't turning the ball over. That's the type of half that gives you so much hope about this Pelicans team. You know, that's the type of half, Matt, if I'm being honest with you, that makes you want to emotionally invest in this team here and buy into this team here a little bit. And then they come crashing back down to earth. So it's a mix of, yeah, they're good, and Boston's just better than them, but also this is something that's been happening a lot, and you've got to kind of sort some of it out.
He's on Twitter at NolaJake. Jake, I'm never going to sit here and try to tell anybody I know X's and O's and rotations and who should be where. You alluded to coaching and some of the decisions that they're making, in particular in the third quarter. What, in your opinion, would be a better option for this team coming out of halftime?
I don't know if it's necessarily coming out of halftime. I think you can get by starting Larry Nance Jr. there, and that's something that they want to experiment with, and you need more than 4 or 5 games of data on that to really make a determination. So sticking with that for the foreseeable future, I think, is an okay thing. I think what you've just got to realize is take a look at the landscape of the NBA in 2024, and it's an offense-driven league. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me here, but if you look at like the historical best offenses in NBA history in terms of offensive rating, which is points scored per 100 possessions, so it kind of puts everyone on the same level. You're comparing apples to apples that way. I think 15 of the top 25 are playing this season. It's an offensive-driven league, right? You're not going to win with defense. Willie Green is a defensive head coach. He wants to run these defensive lineups and try and grind games out. The problem is that good offense beats good defense right now, and I think good offense beats even better defense right now. You hear guys like Steve Kerr and others kind of lamenting in their post-game press conferences, there's no defense in the league. The league has kind of legislated defense out. Well, if that's the case, you've got to win with offense. You've got to keep trying to pile on the points rather than throwing a defensive lineup out there that maybe will limit the opponent a little bit, but is going to give you 0 points or near 0 points. So I think they need to just lean heavily into offense and try and keep scoring when they have some of these big leads. So that means more minutes for guys like Jordan Hawkins to space the court for Zion Williamson. That means more minutes for guys like Trey Murphy and trying some of these lineups that, might give up a bucket on the inside. But if you're scoring a 3, you're outscoring your opponent if you're giving up 2s, and that's still going to help you win the game. That's, I think, what they need to try and at least experiment more with, and that's something they're not doing in the second half of games.
Jake, look, obviously you can never have too much shooting, but do you feel that this team has enough scorers on it to do what you're suggesting?
So that's kind of the million-dollar question here, and that comes down to Brandon Ingram as a player. And I think one of the things you've seen is they've tried to kind of run the offense through him a lot this year, kind of make him your point forward, your point guard. That's worked, but also doesn't work against some of these top teams. And I think one of the things the Pelicans opponents have realized, particularly in the second half of games, is just wall off the rim, right? Brandon Ingram wants to drive and either try and attack the basket or more likely settle for a mid-range jumper. NBA teams are more than happy to let you take mid-range jumpers, particularly if they're contested, right? Like, that's the shot they want you to take. And you have a guy on this roster who's like, give me all of those.
Yeah.
That might work in the playoffs, but you've got to get there in the first place. So I think if you look at kind of building the offense, running point Zion, which we've seen before, which is really effective, they did that against the Utah Jazz last week. They scored 153 points, the most they've ever scored in franchise history. They were 23 for 46 from 3, 50% on a high volume. I think you need to lean into that more, but the problem is you need Brandon Ingram shooting threes, and he's been very inconsistent with the amount of attempts that he's taken this season. If he's not going to space the court like that, Zion runs into a wall of 3, sometimes 4 defenders, can't score efficiently at the rim, and your offense just kind of grinds to a halt, or you're relied on mid-range jumpers, which is just a very inefficient offense and isn't going to win games against top teams. So you've heard a lot about how C.J. McCollum has kind of changed his shot profile this season. He's focused more on open catch-and-shoot threes, off-the-dribble threes to space the court, and you saw that working in the beginning of the game against Boston, and when they stopped shooting threes in the second half, Boston just goes, okay, we'll throw 3 guys at Zion Williamson, and the offense kind of grinds to a halt. So you need another shooter out there on the court with Zion, and when you look at the starting lineup, that guy has got to be Brandon Ingram doing it in volume. He does some nights, he doesn't other nights. When he does, this team looks great. When he doesn't, there's some issues there.
He's on Twitter at Nola Jake, Locked on Pelicans. You could, wherever you get your podcast, search Locked on Pelicans, or if you want to see his beautiful beard, you can go to YouTube. The Locked on Pelicans podcast is right there as well. It is a very beautiful beard, Jake, I have to say. You groom it.
Spend a lot of time, keep it groomed here, you know.
All right, I got 2 more things for you. Let's pull back to the 10,000-foot view. Sure, it's disappointing losing last night when you had a 17-point lead, but I'm looking at a team that just passed the halfway point. You're at 26-21, and I know. Look, a week ago you were in the 5 seed, and now you're in the 8 seed as of today. But Give me some context on, at 26 and 21, how we should feel about this team at this moment right now.
Yeah, I think you look at them and you think they're a good team. There is a good team here. They are currently, as of today, despite some of these very disappointing losses and losses against some of the top teams in the league, a good team. They should be in the playoffs, right? Anything outside of the playoffs would be a horrific year. Even the play-in tournament would be a disappointment for the Pelicans this season. I think they're very fully capable of being the 6th seed or better, potentially climbing as high as the 4th seed. Now, if you're the 4th seed, are you going to be a favorite to win the NBA title, to make the conference finals? No. But I think that definitely would be a step in the right direction. Even if they get bounced out of the playoffs in the first round, but they're competitive in that series, depending on the matchup, I think we view that as a step going forward. And as they approach the NBA's trade deadline, they kind of have some decisions they need to make around this. I'm kind of the mindset of don't make a move right now. Just see what this team does. They do have some very quality wins. They've gone to Minnesota, beaten that team by a lot on the road, and that team has been one of the top ones in the Western Conference for basically the entirety of the regular season. They've beaten Denver. They completely own the Sacramento Kings. They've beaten OKC without Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram playing. There is a very good team here that I feel is not even close to reaching their full potential. So if they do figure some of that out, the ceiling for this team is higher than a team like Minnesota, I think, or potentially OKC.
All right, before you go, saw today that Dyson Daniels and Jordan Hawkins have both been selected to the Rising Stars game. If you would, just give me a thought on those two young guys and what they mean, what their future will be for this franchise.
Yeah, I think Hawkins, when he was drafted, I called him the best fit of the first round of the NBA draft. He comes to a team that desperately needed shooting. He's the best movement shooter there. One of the things you see him do is work so well off ball and start to develop a little bit of a two-man game with Zion Williamson. If they do want to go with point Zion and you need more shooting around him, this is one of the most perfect guys to do it. One of the biggest compliment you can give him this season right now is he's already on opponent scouting reports. They don't give him an inch of space right now. For a rookie that's, under 50 games into his NBA career, to kind of be a focal point of defenses, I think really says a lot about him. Dyson Daniels getting in there, kind of being one of those next wave of international players and some of the elite defense that he gives you, I think shows that he can be a very talented player in this league. And I think both of those guys kind of filling different roles on this Pelicans team speaks to some of the depth that they have here and trying to build around the 3 stars, 2 stars, and Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, and CJ McCollum.
Next up, Pels take on the Rockets there in Houston. Make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Just search Locked On Pelicans. Locked On Pelicans. He's on Twitter at Nola Jake. He is Jake Madison. Jake, we appreciate it, man. Thanks as always for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.